This is going to add more cost to the supply chain. So importers are going to have to deal with this additional cost. And it's, one of the challenges is that that cost is not equally across all countries. So producers in some countries are going to have a much higher tariff on their coffee than producers in other countries. So it's something that I think initially importers of coffee into the US, obviously this only affects the US, they're going to have to pass on that additional cost to their customers, to the roasters. And then it's, there's really a question about, how much of that additional cost are they going to pass on to customers, particularly in light of coffee prices being so high in the past year.
If you're starting or growing your business in these volatile times in coffee and you need a little extra support, our scope of business advisory services may be just what you need. Join one of our hugely successful mastermind groups for support in a group setting, or send us an email to discuss our one-on-one consulting and business advisory services, where we'll work with you one-on-one to solve specific problems in your coffee business. All our services come with a 100% money-back guarantee, so send us an email at support@mapperforward.org and let us know how we can help you today. Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and this is episode 1 of a 5-part series that I'm super excited about. We're in a very, very volatile time in coffee. We've got lots to talk about, and this is the first time that we are going to have somebody from TechnoServe, an NGO, on the podcast. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Paul Stewart, the Global Coffee Director from TechnoServe, to the podcast for the first time. Thanks for being here, Paul.
Thank you, Lee.
Very excited for a whole bunch of reasons, but in particular, we have been trying to have this conversation for a minute, and the universe had deemed that we should have it at this time. And for better or worse, with all the delays that we've had, it turned out to be a rather fortuitous time because of the thing that is top of mind for everybody, which is tariffs. And so while that was not something that we had decided to talk about, what we did to decide we would talk about was poverty among coffee farmers. We are going to incorporate tariffs into the conversation. We are recording this for reference sake on the 8th of April. If you're a patron on our Patreon or you're a paid subscriber, you will receive this days before everybody else. So you will get this information rather quickly. If you're not, consider joining so that you can have access to a lot of the content that we're putting out sooner than everybody else. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about what role do NGOs play in the coffee value chain. Before we get stuck into that, Paul, please tell people what you do, and then we're going to have a conversation about tariffs and then lean into what we intend to talk about.
Sure. So I lead TechnoServe's coffee work across 13 countries, and I've been with TechnoServe for 23 years, working exclusively on coffee with coffee farmers. And I was based in East Africa for over 20 years, in Tanzania, Rwanda, most recently in Ethiopia for 10 years.
Now, I got turned on to TechnoServe thanks to Mallory. Shout out to Mallory. Mallory spoke very highly of the work that you've done all over the world. And she gave me a bit of an insight into what TechnoServe does. And what I was quite embarrassed about was that I did not know that ahead of time. And I think it's important for people listening to know exactly what TechnoServe does, particularly for the coffee industry. Would you mind helping people understand what role TechnoServe plays in the coffee industry?
Sure. So maybe the best way to explain is to just tell you a little bit about the history of the work that TechnoServe has been doing in the coffee sector. So we actually started working with coffee farmers in Nicaragua back in the 1990s when we supported actually people who had been fighting soldiers and other combatants who had laid down their arms. The government was distributing land to those farmers, and TechnoServe worked with many of those farmers to help them to start small coffee farms. And that was our first kind of foray into the coffee world. And then really our work started to really scale up in the early 2000s. And that was when I joined. in East Africa. And you probably recall in actually the month I joined in April 2002, the coffee market reached its lowest point ever. And coffee farmers were, really despairing all over the world. And our work really scaled up at that time to really focus on supporting farmers. There were some farmers who were at lower altitudes who really just wanted to get out of coffee. They just couldn't make a living from coffee. And so we did some work in parts of Central America to help farmers to move into high value horticulture businesses. And many of those farmers have been super successful doing that. And then the farmers at higher altitudes, we worked with to get into specialty coffee. And that was, such a great opportunity in the early 2000s when the specialty coffee market was growing at phenomenal rate. And that was the work that I was really focused on for many years in East Africa.
And for those who don't know what an NGO is, can you explain to them what an NGO does?
Sure. So an NGO, or non-governmental organization, also often referred to as non-profits. It's an organization which really fills the gaps that private companies and government aren't able to play a role. So in the coffee sector, many of the countries that produce, or I would actually say most of the countries that produce coffee, are low-income countries where governments don't have the resources to invest in things like research and development, in extension and training services to farmers. And these are some of the roles that NGOs are, have been playing. And they're always very much focused with a social mission, helping farmers, helping businesses to really support them to overcome the challenges that they face.
And how are NGOs funded?
So a variety of sources. So a big source of funding is governmental donors. So around the world there are many, rich countries that donate to organizations that are doing good work around the world. And that can be, a lot of that is humanitarian aid to support countries where there are a lot of challenges. But then there's also kind of developmental type work, like the type of work that TechnoServe does, which is really supporting people to increase their incomes. So you have those public sector donors. A second group is foundations, and there are many foundations around the world that support this type of work. And then the third, actually, you might be surprised to hear, is corporations. So in the case of TechnoServe, TechnoServe's motto is business solutions to poverty. We're very focused on helping people to create very successful farms and businesses. So we actually have a lot of business leaders who really support the work, and a lot of companies that support the work. So in our coffee work, we're actually very much funded by all three of those different types of donor.
Okay, great. And you get money from the government? Can you see where I'm going here? We're heading into tariffs and USAID.
Yep. So at the moment we get funding from a few different governments, like Canadian government supports a big program we're doing in Ethiopia. And in the past, actually a lot of the work I was doing in Tanzania many years ago was funded by USAID. And but USAID in more recent years actually hasn't been funding so much work in the coffee sector. We had just one coffee program funded by USAID this year, which was in Eastern Congo. And so sadly that project, we had to close that down as a result of, the changes at USAID.
Recent changes. Speaking about your recent changes, here we go with the tariffs conversation that everybody wants to have. And just a heads up, folks, we have 3 economists, 3 separate people coming on the podcast to speak, from an economic perspective about these tariffs. So Paul, we're not going to burden you with the ChatGPT version of your brain and saying, we want you to act like an economist. Now, tell us everything about tariffs. That's not what we're going to do. But from your understanding, as someone who has such close proximity to a large number of coffee producers, talk to us about what the tariff situation is and how you think that that's going to impact coffee producers.
Sure. So, this is going to add more cost to the supply chain. So importers are going to have to deal with this additional cost. And it's, one of the challenges is that cost is not equally across all countries. So producers in some countries are going to have a much higher tariff on their coffee than producers in other countries. So it's something that I think initially importers of coffee into the US, obviously this only affects the US, they're going to have to pass on that additional cost to their customers, to the roasters. And then it's, there's really a question about, how much of that additional cost are they going to pass on to customers, particularly in light of coffee prices being so high in the past year.
And so just for clarity's sake, folks, President Trump issued an executive order. There are going to be sweeping at least 10% tariffs across the board. The person who pays the tariff is the person who is receiving the coffee into the country. So it is not the country or the business in the country where the goods are leaving that pay the tariff. It is actually the American business owner that is receiving the goods that will pay the tariff. So what we expect is going to happen here is that we're going to see some serious volatility happening very quickly over the next few weeks and months. Why? Because if your goods left origin and bill of loading was, I believe, the 4th or the 5th of April, tariffs do not apply. But if your goods left the origin country, and correct me if I'm getting anything wrong here, Paul, please, but if your goods left origin after that date, you will have to pay at least a 10% tariff unless it's coming from Mexico or from Canada. Now, if we're looking at containers of coffee, that means that the company that's receiving the goods has to come up with, on the low end, we're looking at around $10,000 extra out of nowhere. You have to come up with 10,000 USD out of nowhere, and that could get much higher. If you're getting coffee out of Vietnam, we're looking at, I believe, 46%, which is huge. And so this is where we're going to see some very interesting things happen. Paul, you were going to say something?
No, that's totally my understanding as well.
Great. So this volatility is not just about how this is going to change things with regards to increasing prices to consumers, passing on those prices. What we're seeing here is a convergence of two very high energy events: the volatility of the market and the volatility of what impact these tariffs are going to have on the lines of credit and the trade, the trade loans that people are getting, as well as the amount of capital that they have access to in order to get them through an event that they weren't able to plan for. And that will mean that I expect that we are going to see an increase in the number of bankruptcies that we will see that will be accelerated. The businesses that we thought that might file for bankruptcy later, or who thought that they were trying to get through this, will see that accelerated. Are you seeing some things in a similar way, Paul?
Yeah, look, I think you have a better understanding of that side of the business than I do. My focus is really on the farmers and processing and the producing countries. But yeah, I think what you've outlined actually absolutely makes sense in terms of what happens when costs go up that weren't expected. So
now, as we move through this conversation, we're going to talk more about this and kind of weave this into the discussion. What I'd like to start talking about now, though, is what role do NGOs play in the coffee value chain? And as we discuss through this series, I would like to get a deeper understanding of how these tariffs will affect farmers as we talk about poverty and how that hasn't changed through. But what role do you as an NGO and other NGOs play in the coffee value chain?
Right. So I think the best way to frame the role NGOs play is to really walk through the supply chain and, just kind of think about where are all the different points along the supply chain that you see NGOs playing. So if you go all the way to the beginning of, producing the seed for the coffee and creating new coffee varieties. So there's some great work being done by NGOs like World Coffee Research, who are really focused on breeding new varieties of coffee that are more drought resistant and are, suitable across a lot of countries that don't have their own breeding programs. And a lot of that work is going to really pay off in the 20 to 50 years time, creating those new seedlings that farmers are going to need in the future. So that's kind of the first point in the supply chain. And then if you go to the farmer level, as I mentioned earlier, there are many farmers around the world who don't have access to extension services, kind of training. Governments aren't able to provide that. So that's a role that we see NGOs like TechnoServe do a lot of that work, kind of supporting training of farmers who really haven't had that opportunity. And then the next step up is kind of when you get to the organization of farmers. NGOs have played, I think, a really important role in the past in helping farmers to organize themselves into cooperatives to be able to process their coffee, add value and get, have linkages to markets. And then we have, some very specialized NGOs that work on very specific things. So I think of like training certification, so certifying people to become trainers. So Coffee Quality Institute is an organization that has done great work on that around training cuppers and people who work in processing, wet mill processing. And then there's even on the marketing side, you have nonprofits like Cup of Excellence, which are working on really helping to promote, some of the most special coffees directly from farmers. And then you have other kind of ancillary services around the coffee sector, like access to finance, which Root Capital is probably the main player in that space, working particularly with cooperatives, helping them to get access to credit, which would be very difficult for them to access maybe from local banks. So I think that kind of covers a lot of the different types of roles and different parts of the supply chain that you see NGOs playing in the coffee industry.
There has been, as we've had people from Cup of Excellence and Fair Trade International, et cetera, on the podcast, what I find interesting is that people are very polarized by these kinds of association or organizations. And something that I have always found to be true is that when I speak with people one-on-one, you find a fabulous human that has really great intentions in the work that they want to do behind the name of the organization. So what I'm interested in is asking who are the kind of people that typically work for NGOs, because it seems like kind of a thankless endeavor. I'm sure that you're not earning the same kind of wages that people in some of these big organizations or corporations out there could be making. So what's typically the background of people that come into working for NGOs?
I think it's probably a bit different depending on the NGO. Like
Mm-hmm.
TechnoServe tends to hire a lot from businesses, people who actually have business experience, because that's the type of work that we're doing. But I think the thing that you'll find that we all have in common is that we care deeply about
Mm.
coffee farmers, and we care deeply about fighting poverty, and we really believe in the work that we're doing. And frankly, I and many of my colleagues have been at TechnoServe for 15, 20 years plus, because we actually see the results on the ground, and we see the impact that this type of work can have. And that just makes it easy to get up in the morning and do this type of work when you really see the impact.
Yeah, I love it. So in the next episode, folks, we're going to talk about why smallholder coffee farmers, or not why, yes, why are smallholder coffee farmers poorer today than they were 50 years ago? So join us for the next episode. And it's a question that we've all been asking over the span of 50 years. Why is it that we haven't moved the needle? And is this moment that we're experiencing right now with the volatility of the markets as they are, is that going to hold? Isn't it going to hold? Let's see. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, friends. Please don't forget to show us some love by subscribing, liking, commenting, and most of all, sharing this podcast with your friends. Check the show notes for links, including our sponsors and our Patreon. And stay tuned for more great conversations on the Daily Coffee Pro by Map It Forward.